My name is Amanda Neville. I am one of the trainers in the Outreach and Training Department. So we are going to go ahead and get started today. We're going to talk about special open enrollment events. So as you're all familiar with, probably by this point, you are placed in muted mode for this presentation. But if for some reason you're really tech savvy and can figure out how to unmute yourself, we ask that you don't so we can try and get through this presentation today. If you are having any other technical issues, we are unable to assist at this point in time. So we do apologize if it keeps you from participating. Just know that we do record all of the webinars and we post them on the Benefits Administrator website on that training materials page. All right, so in regards to questions today, please use the questions feature to send questions throughout the webinar. We will try to address questions by topic when it's appropriate and also at the end of the presentation. Just a reminder, for any questions that we're unable to answer today, we will get back to you, likely via email, phone call, or a Fuse message. So please just hang on a couple days. We will get back to you, likely early next week. And if you have any employee-related questions or scenarios, more specifics that you know we're probably not going to be able to answer in a generic fashion, go ahead and send those through Fuse. And just a reminder that Outreach and Training customer service phone number, the 1-800-700-1555, this is really for really urgent matters that need to be resolved right away. So you do have a customer support line as well. Now, with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Miss Sarah. Sarah, good morning.
Friday, but like Amanda said, it is very gloomy here in Shelton where I'm located. We are going to be going over the special open enrollments, and it is my pleasure to be presenting that to you today. So let's go ahead and get started. So the content in today's webinar will be going over two policies. It's policy 45-2 that goes over the actual special open enrollment, and then policy 45-2A, that is the addendum, and that is the actual special open enrollment matrix. We'll show you some examples of what that looks like here later on in the presentation. There are also some WACs that go over the special open enrollment information. So we have WAC 18230-090, when may a subscriber change health plans? WAC 18230-100, when may a school employee enroll or revoke an election and make a new election under the Premium Payment Plan, FSA, and DCAP programs. WAC 18231-080, when may a school employee waive enrollment in SEBB Medical, and when may they enroll in SEBB Medical after having waived enrollment? And then lastly, WAC 18231-150, when may subscribers enroll or remove eligible dependents? All right, so before we get started, what is a special open enrollment? That is going to be a qualifying event that occurs outside of the annual open enrollment that allows an employee to make changes to their health plan coverage. Now, employees have no later than 60 days after that SOE event to provide proof of the event that created that SOE. So no later than 60 days, they need to provide documentation. That can be a marriage certificate, birth certificate, proof of loss of other coverage. It all depends on what the SOE event is. And then they also have no later than 60 days to either get into SEBB My Account and create that SOE event, or to submit a school employee change form to their BA. So 60 days, very key number, no later than 60 days. We also ask that you please remind employees to complete their enrollment as soon as possible. The reason for that is because the effective dates are generally the later of the first of the month following the event or the date the form is received. So it's the later of either of those, and we'll show you some scenarios and examples of that later on. So there's certain life events and circumstances that are going to qualify an employee for a special open enrollment event. We do want to remind you that an employee gaining initial eligibility does not qualify them for an SOE. They have that initial enrollment period for that. So you're probably asking, well, what is a qualifying life event? So here are some examples. It can be a marriage, birth, adoption of a child, change in residence, say a child is becoming an extended dependent, or a dependent loses coverage. Keep in mind, these are just a few of the examples. You can find a whole list of what a qualifying life event can be on the SOE Matrix. Now let's take a look at what that matrix looks like. Here's a screenshot, and this scenario is specific to the marriage SOE. So here over on the left-hand side, you have your SOE event in that green box. So the scenario is marriage. This gray column is going to be acceptable forms of valid documentation, the documents that you are going to be verifying to ensure that we can qualify this as a special open enrollment. And then over on the right, this section is going to be what changes are and what are not allowed in accordance to the specific SOE event. All right, so now let's let you know where we can find the SOE matrix. So if you go to the BA website, scroll down, and on the left-hand side, you're going to see the box that says Laws, Rules, and Policies. That last bullet says SEBB Rules and Policies. Go ahead and click that. And then you're going to go ahead and scroll down to where you see Special Open Enrollment. And you'll see the Policy 45-2 and then the 45-2A, which is that matrix. And that was the screenshot I just showed you in that previous slide. So when an SOE event is created in SEBB account, the BAs must verify the SOE event prior to the employee being enrolled in SEBB benefits. Okay, so it is the BA's responsibility to approve or deny verification of all SOE events, and you as BAs would do that via the SOE verification tab in SEBB account. And then if any dependents are being added onto coverage, you do have to go in and verify them via the dependent verification tab. And then just a little blurb here, we do have some SOE guides, which I think all of you BAs will find super useful. So we have some SOE guides that are going to be posted either today or hopefully by Monday. And what they are step-by-step guides that are going to guide both you as the employers, and then there's also going to be a guide for employees to walk you step-by-step of how to do an SOE. On the BA website, the SOE guides are going to be located both in the quick reference guide and on the manual section.
Sarah, and I wanted to add into that as well. We don't know the exact location for the school employee special open enrollment step-by-step guide. It will be on that school employee webpage. Once, it should be posted, like Sarah mentioned, here in the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for that. I did want to address a quick question before we move on. So for brand new marriages, is a marriage certificate alone enough? And Sarah walked us through that event number 1, the marriage, and it says right on the special open enrollment matrix that they do have to have the marriage certificate along with proof of the marriage. So if they're able to have a utility bill, maybe they have one in one name and another one in another name, as long as it's showing the same address, that would work. But we do have to have both. A marriage certificate alone is not enough even for a brand new marriage. So just wanted to address that up top before we head into our presentation further. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. All right. So when can employees make changes? So they can make changes during the annual open enrollment. This year, it's going to be from October 26th to November 23rd. And then any changes made during that annual open enrollment are going to be effective January 1st, 2021. And then, of course, the topic we're talking about today, employees can make changes during special open enrollment events, and they have up to 60 days after that SOE event occurs to submit the changes. All right, so let's get into some scenarios. So our first scenario we're going to be going over is marriage. So we have an employee who is Fred Anderson. He gets married to Sally on May 29th. Fred logs into SEBB account and creates the special open enrollment event and uploads valid documentation on June 12th. So, what is going to be considered valid documentation for this scenario?
Well, I would guess probably at least a marriage certificate, right?
Yes. So, there's two parts. They have to submit the marriage certificate along with proof that the marriage is still valid. So, like Amanda said earlier, it can be a utility bill, a financial statement, just something that's showing that that marriage is still valid and that couple is still residing at the same address. So, when would coverage begin in this scenario?
Well, you told me they got married on May 29th. So would the coverage begin in June or would it be in July?
So, remember before I said coverage is effective the first of the month following either the date of the event or when we receive the documentation and that SOE event is created. So, in this scenario, the effective date is going to be July 1st.
Okay.
So let's take a look at the matrix again. So here we have our SOE event, marriage. This gray section is going to explain what are acceptable forms of valid documentation. So you'll see that they have to provide that marriage certificate. And then down here in this little blurb, it says, if adding a new spouse, the subscriber must also provide evidence of the marriage still being valid. So this matrix is a great resource if you are ever questioning what documents are needed when an SOE event is created. And then again, go ahead.
Sorry about that, Sarah. You finish.
Oh, okay. So, and then over here on the right, we have what changes are able to be made when an employee becomes married. So here is our section where they are adding an eligible dependent, right? Because he's adding his new spouse to the SEBB coverage. So here you can look here and it says enrollment date. So enrollment is effective the first day of the month after the later of either the date of marriage or the date the form is received. So it is in the employee's best interest to go ahead and complete their enrollment as soon as possible and to create that SOE event and submit all of that valid documentation. Because the sooner it is, then it's the first of that following month of when coverage will be effective for that new spouse.
So I do want to take a pause here. So a lot of you are saying, oh my goodness, it just doesn't make sense for brand new couples. How are they going to have anything? So keep in mind that there are other documents that can be approved to prove the marriage. So if you have an employee who just got married and maybe they never have lived together, they don't have anything that shows their address, that they're residing in the same address, please go ahead and send in a fuse with that employee's circumstance and any documents that they may have available, and you can get guidance from outreach and training on if it's acceptable or not. So there are ways that we can make exceptions, and those would be the circumstances where you want to send in a fuse. So I know we're getting a lot of questions about that. We do understand that that is a likely scenario where they're not living together until they get married, and so wouldn't have bills or anything that would show the same address. So there are exceptions to that rule, and you would want to send in a fuse and ask about that specific scenario.
All right, thank you, Amanda. So on to our next scenario. This one we're going to be covering birth. So Madison Smith, who is an employee, gives birth to a newborn baby, Hannah, on May 15th. Madison logs into SEBB My account and creates the SOE event and uploads valid documentation on June 20th. Madison also wishes to change her medical plan at this time. So in this scenario, what is going to be considered valid documentation?
Could Madison submit that document she gets from the hospital that has the baby's footprints?
Yes. So there's two documents that we can accept in this scenario, either the birth certificate or the hospital certificate with the child's footprints on it. We can accept either one of those. So when does coverage begin for the newborn?
Would the coverage begin on the day that the baby is born?
Yes. So this scenario is a little bit different than our previous scenario. So this one actually backdates to the date of birth. So coverage would be effective May 15th. And then we did mention that Madison was wanting to change her medical plan at this time. So what would be the effective date of that new medical plan?
Well, you said the baby was born May 15th, but didn't submit the SOE event till June 20th. So I'm going to guess, is it June or is it May?
So the coverage is going to backdate and be effective May 1st. So let's go ahead and take a look at that matrix since this one's a little bit different. So here on the left, we have our SOE event, birth or adoption. In this gray section, of course, we have the acceptable forms of valid documentation that we can accept. So here you will see birth certificate or hospital certificate with the child's footprints on it. Now, if there is an employee who is adopting a child, there are different forms of documentation listed here that we would accept for the adoption. And then this next section is going to show you enrolling an eligible dependent is allowed for this SOE event. So she is adding her newborn child. So if we look down here and it says enrollment date, enrollment of the newborn or newly adopted child is affected the day of the birth, adoption, or day assuming legal obligation. So it's going to be the day of the birth for this child. And then over here, we also, because remember, we mentioned she wants to change her medical plan at this time. So she is able to do that and change her election. And down here, if we look at what the effective date would be for that, the new plan effective date is the first of the month of the birth, adoption, or when assuming legal obligation. Keep in mind, this may result in different dates for the dependent enrollment and the plan change. So you have that May 1st for the plan change effective date, and then May 15th for the effective date of the child's coverage, the date of birth.
So I did want to address something. I had a wonderful, one of you BAs gave me a nice little clue here, and I figured I would share this with everybody. So when we do submit that hospital certificate with the footprints, we also want to make sure it has the parents' names on it. So if it doesn't, you're also going to likely need a letter from the hospital that does show the parent's name so we can make that connection between the employee and the new child. So wanted to share that with everybody. Thank you so much. We did get a couple of questions about that. So if we do get the hospital certificate with footprints, make sure we also have parents' names included.
Great point. All right, let's go on to our next scenario. So this scenario, we're going to be covering a dependent losing eligibility. So our employee, Ben, gets divorced from Shelley, which is finalized on May 30th. Ben logs into SEBB account and creates the SOE event and uploads valid documentation both on June 13th. So what is considered valid documentation for this scenario?
Would it be the divorce papers, the court papers?
Yes. So in this scenario, we would be able to accept the petition for dissolution of marriage, or in other words, divorce decree. When does coverage end from Shelley since she is being removed?
My guess is probably the end of May, right?
Yes. So the coverage termination is going to be effective May 31st. So let's take a look at this screenshot of the matrix. So we have our event, the dependent loses eligibility. This gray section explains the different forms of documentation we're able to accept, and you'll see that a petition for dissolution of marriage is listed here. We also have in the case of a state registered domestic partner or if someone were to pass away. Now this screenshot is going to look a little bit different in this section. So this big gray box represents that the columns above are not changes that are able to be done in relation to this SOE event. And then you'll see over on the right here, these are the changes that are allowed to be made during this SOE event. All right, on to our next scenario. So employment status change. In this scenario, the employee's dependent is having an employment status change. So we have Devin Harris, who is currently enrolled in medical, dental, and vision. Mel Harris, Devin's spouse, gets laid off from her job effective May 13th. Devin now needs to add Mel onto SEBB coverage. He logs into SEBB My Account and creates the SOE event and uploads valid documentation on June 12th. So what is considered valid documentation?
Would that be like if she had a termination letter from her employment?
Yes. So we can accept either a termination letter or a letter of resignation from her employer, basically stating that she no longer has benefits. Now, also because we are adding Mel onto Devin's SEBB My Account profile as a brand new dependent, we also have to verify her as a dependent. So we would need also the marriage certificate and proof of the marriage still being valid to get her verified over there. When would coverage start?
I think in this case, because it was submitted June 12th, that would be July 1st.
Correct. So first of the month following after either the date of the event or when we receive the documentation and that event is created. So July 1st is going to be that effective date. Now, how long would Devin have to create the SOE event and upload valid documentation?
I think, if I heard you right, multiple times it's 60 days.
60 days, very important number. So he has 60 days from the date of the event, which begins May 13th, which is the day that Mel was laid off from her job. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this SOE matrix for a subscriber's dependent having a change in employment. So we have our event over here. We have acceptable forms of documentation that we can accept. And then we have all of the changes that are able to be done in accordance to this SOE event. So here in the middle section, you'll see enroll eligible dependents, since we are adding her onto coverage. And if we look, you can see the effective date, the new plan effective date is the first of the month after the later of the date of change in employment or date the form is received. So it'd be July 1st since he submitted the forms in June.
So a question I would like to address, so what if we have a dependent who is already on dental and vision and we're adding them for any number of special open enrollment events, but let's use this one for example, change in employment status for the dependent. If they were already enrolled in dental and vision, you would not need to re-verify them as a dependent. They're already in the system verified as a dependent, so it would just be adding them to that medical coverage. They would have to show the proof for the loss of their coverage or that it would allow them to enroll at this point in time, but they would not have to be re-verified as a dependent. If they're already verified, they're good.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda.
One more before we move on, Sarah. I apologize about that. So what if Devin had logged in May in this example? Would they be able to have the change effective June 1st? And yes, that is absolutely correct. And that's the reason why Sarah has been stressing to us throughout this presentation that it's really important for the employees to log in and be on top of this, because the quicker they do it, the quicker they're going to be able to have their change effective, because it's always, most of the time, it's going to be the first of the following month. So if a dependent is losing coverage, it is really they're on their best, I don't know why I'm losing my words. It's really best for them to log in before that month is over when their dependent is losing coverage, so they can have their coverage begin through SEBB the first of the following month, so they don't have a gap in coverage. So it's really important for them to do it as quickly as possible. Maybe even if they don't have the documentation, they can still go in there, create the event in the month of May in Devin's scenario, and get everything in and get the documentation as quickly as they have it so they can get that change effective June 1st. So back to you, Sarah.
Great clarification. Thank you so much. So my intention was to get into our SEBB My Account training environment to show you some of these scenarios in a sort of a live demo, but unfortunately I was having a little bit of issues with SEBB My Account this morning. It wasn't allowing me to get in, so I do apologize for that. I did want to point out that in our previous recorded webinar, Making Changes, there are some recorded live demos in our SEBB My Account training environment when it comes to SOEs. So if you would like to see those, you can always refer back to that recorded webinar.
We also did some of the special open enrollment events in the SEBB My Account training that I believe was in early March before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So there is a few webinars out there that you guys can check out for live SOE submittals in SEBB My Account.
All right, so there are some reminders I would like to go over. So you see that there is an employee who submitted an SOE request. There's a few questions you'll want to ask before you do go in and verify or approve or deny these SOE requests. So ask yourself, did the employee submit valid documentation? Did they add or remove dependents, if applicable, if that's what they're trying to do? Keep in mind that this will vary by SOE event. Did they make their proper attestations? This is both for the tobacco surcharge as well as the spousal surcharge. And did they make the proper plan elections for each individual? Now remember, when they get into SEBB My Account and they do add a dependent, they do have to select what they are choosing to enroll that dependent under. So they would have to choose for medical, dental, and vision. If you answered yes to the above questions, that is when you would go to the SOE verification tab, as well as the dependent verification tab if they are adding dependents, to approve or deny that request. All right, so let's go over some resources. So of course we have the BA website. It's full of a lot of useful information and resources there. We have our outreach and training 1-800 number. And then we also have our secure messaging via Fuse. We do want to remind you that the 1-800 number for outreach and training and the Fuse secured messaging is only for you as the BAs. Please do not give these resources to your employees. And then I wanted to notate some upcoming webinars. There are a few that have been added. So June 24th, we're going to be going over the limited open enrollment during the month of July. So more to come on that. June 26th, we'll be going over retirement accounting and billing. July 31st, we'll be going over understanding error correction. And then August 14th, we'll be going over preparing for the upcoming school year, since that is approaching very quickly. Also coming soon, I am going to be working on a series of recorded webinars for each individual SOE event. So you'll be able to refer back to those. And during those, I'm also going to attempt to do some SEBB My Account live demos so you can see what it looks like to get in and approve the SOE events for each event. Of course, here is the link to go ahead and get registered for those upcoming webinars. And you can also find those on the BA website under training schedule. And also I wanted to remind you that all of our webinars are recorded and you can go back and rewatch them if you would like. And those are located on the BA website under training materials.
Awesome, Sarah. So we're going to go ahead and review some questions today. Just a reminder, everybody, if we don't answer your question either in response directly to you or verbally right now, we will get back to you via email, phone call, or Fuse, likely early next week. So please don't send in a separate Fuse if you didn't get your question answered today. We will respond back to you, I promise. If it is a more specific scenario that you have questions about, then go ahead and send in a Fuse. Also wanted to let you guys know, hopefully you've noticed in the last couple of webinars that you've received a survey after the fact. We ask you to please go ahead and respond to that so we can get some feedback on how we're doing. You will actually get a message about an hour after today's webinar to complete that survey. So one thing I'd like to address right off the bat, and I know several of you guys have asked for this in the last, oh goodness, 10 months or so. SEBB My account does not send any notifications either to you as the BA or to the employees. It is something that you actively have to log in. Hopefully that's just a daily routine so you can see when an SOE event has been submitted or a new dependent has been added so you can do those verifications. So the system is not sending you any notifications. So what is included in the limited open enrollment during July? Great question. I'm sure you guys are probably wondering what this is about. We will have some information for you at that June 24th webinar that Sarah mentioned, 10 a.m. The registration is now up on the Benefits Administrator website for you to go ahead and register. We will go over all the available changes that employees can make at that time. So I am going to try and review some questions, so bear with us here. So one of the questions was, will the videos be directed towards benefits administrators, or will we be training employees how to submit an SOE? And that's a wonderful question, because actually the process is really the same for both you or for the employee. So when the employee logs in, they're going to see the same steps that you would see if you received the change form from an employee. They're still going to have to select the event and the date, and then it's going to provide them all the available options. So the process really is the same for either one of you. Of course, their SEBB My account dashboard just looks a little bit different because you're able to see all of your employees and they're only able to see their own information. But really the process is exactly the same. And we wanted to point out why it's important for you to go and look at those special open enrollment events that the employees are submitting, because we're getting still a lot of questions about, you know, this employee submitted the SOE, but the coverage, their coverage didn't enroll. And a lot of times that's because the employee didn't complete the SOE correctly. So wanted to provide you those reminders to just take a look before we're verifying those. We also had some questions about the different SOE events and why you may use one versus the other. And I really recommend you guys get really familiar with that matrix. It does explain each one of those events, what those allowable changes are, and what documentation is provided or what documentation they need to provide. There's also SEBB policy 31-1, which is for what dependent verification documents are allowable. So we talked about, you know, hospital certificates with the footprints, or divorce decrees, or marriage certificate with utility bills. That SEBB policy 31-1 does provide additional options for documentation. Where would we find the previous webinar recordings on the SEBB Benefits Administrator website? So it is on the training schedule and materials page. Then you'll want to navigate to the training materials. All the way down at the bottom of that page, it has miscellaneous recordings. So there's a section for the actual recorded webinars and for the presentations. So We heard you guys loud and clear. We're sending out the presentations ahead of time, so hopefully you all received it yesterday for today's webinar. We are also posting those PowerPoint slides on the website as well. So if you want to send it along to one of your coworkers or something, they are able to find it. So everything is on the training materials page of the Benefits Administrator website. So can we get an actual process to email to employees on how to do an SOE? That is exactly what the special open enrollment guides are going to be, a step-by-step document with all of the steps that they would need to include, all of the information. So as Sarah mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it is going to be posted hopefully later today, but it could be on Monday. Definitely on the Benefits Administrator website under the quick reference guides and the manuals pages. We're going to have them in a few different spots for you guys. It also will have a link to that school and school employees guide. It's not going to cover each special open enrollment and how to complete them. It is an overview of how to complete a special open enrollment event. But remember, the steps to complete are really the same regardless of what the event is. It just may be that if you're removing a dependent, you have less steps to complete than if you were adding a dependent. So those guides, again, will be available here in the next couple of days. So we've heard on the news that there's going to be some changes that people can make due to the Section 125 due to COVID-19. So yes, those great question, and that is what we are going to be talking about in the June 24th webinar that goes over our July limited open enrollment event. So postcards will be mailed out to employees here shortly, talking about that July open enrollment event. You guys will also receive notification in the form of GovDelivery messages, and we will be doing that webinar on June 24th. So go ahead and get registered for that, and we will talk about the allowable changes during the limited open enrollment event in July. And I think with that, we can go ahead. We are still going to be available and respond to questions as they come in, but we will go ahead and take this opportunity to say thank you for joining us today. We will respond on a one-on-one basis to your questions, either in the app as we're able to before we wrap up with our time today, or directly via email, phone call, or Fuse early next week. So thank you again for participating today. You will receive an email here in about an hour or so with that survey. If you could please complete that and provide feedback, we greatly appreciate it. So thank you again
everyone
for joining us.